What if the version of Alice everyone dismissed as too much was actually one of Disney's most interesting portrayals of female independence? Today, we're exploring how Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland transformed a wandering girl into a young woman choosing her own future, and why audiences may have misunderstood that story the first time around. There's a specific kind of dismissal that gets reserved for blockbusters, with female protagonists who don't behave the way audiences expect. Too ambitious, too weird, too much. Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland got all of those labels and more. Critics called it hollow spectacle. Audiences were split right down the middle, and yet the film pulled in over $1 billion at the global box office and walked away with 2 Academy Awards. All these years later, with TikTok's hashtag Alice in Wonderland hashtag sitting at over 12 billion views, and Burton back in the cultural conversation through Wednesday and Beetlejuice, it might be time to ask, what were we actually watching? Because here's the thing, Burton's Alice isn't the wide-eyed Victorian child wandering through nonsense. She's a young woman standing at the edge of a life she didn't choose, being pushed toward a marriage she doesn't want, and deciding actively, deliberately, to burn it all down and go her own way. When we meet Mia Wasikowska's Alice, she's at a garden party being pressured into accepting a proposal from a pompous aristocrat. The world around her has already decided what her life looks like: a husband, a household, compliance. It's all dressed up in lace and politeness, but the cage is very real. What Burton does, and what tends to get buried under all the conversations about CGI, is use Wonderland, or Underland as the film calls it, as the space where Alice gets to find out who she actually is before that cage locks shut for good. This wasn't the Alice that Lewis Carroll wrote, and it wasn't the Alice that Disney gave us in 1951 either. Carroll's Alice was a child, reactive and passive, swept along by the surreal logic of a dream. The 1951 animated film softened her further into charming innocence. Burton's reimagining strips all of that away. His Alice isn't dreaming. She's making choices, and the film tracks every single one of them. The moment that lands differently on a rewatch is the ending. Alice doesn't just defeat the Jabberwocky and go home having learned a lesson about believing in herself. She returns to that garden party, turns down the marriage proposal in front of everyone watching, and then proceeds to outline her own plans: business ventures, sea voyages, a future she's mapping entirely for herself. For a Disney blockbuster released in 2010, that is a genuinely interesting place to land. There's no romantic resolution. There's no prince. There's just Alice deciding that her life belongs to her. It's worth putting that in context. The Disney live-action slate of the last decade has leaned heavily on nostalgia and gentle, safe updates. Burton broke from that formula entirely, creating an Alice who resonates with anyone who has ever been told that the path laid out for them is the only one available. The armor she wears in the final battle is almost too on the nose as a visual metaphor, but it works because everything leading up to it earns it. She didn't stumble into that confrontation. She chose it. The loudest criticism leveled at the film in 2010 was the visual excess. And look, some of it holds. Certain effects haven't aged gracefully, and Johnny Depp's Mad Hatter is the kind of performance that can generously be described as a lot. But the criticism of the CGI often became a shorthand for dismissing the film wholesale, which meant everything interesting it was doing with its female lead got collapsed into style over substance. What's strange is that the industry itself disagreed. The Academy gave the film Oscars for art direction and costume design, recognizing the genuine craft in its hybrid of digital and practical aesthetics. Helena Bonham Carter's Red Queen, with her digitally enlarged head and her furious operatic energy, is a genuinely committed performance that lives or dies on that combination of actor and effect. And the influence the film had on what came after is hard to ignore. Maleficent, Snow White and the Huntsman, the entire visual language of maximalist dark fantasy that dominated the 2000s, all owe something to what Burton was doing here. There's a pattern worth naming. Films with female protagonists who exist outside of romantic arcs tend to receive a particular kind of hostility, not always overt, but present and consistent. Alice doesn't fall in love. She doesn't get rescued. She's odd and stubborn, and she keeps insisting on her own interior logic in a world that finds her inconvenient. The film around her is imperfect, and sometimes genuinely messy, but her arc is coherent, and it means something. The generation that grew up watching this film on DVD and then rediscovering it on TikTok seems to understand that intuitively. The aesthetic has been absorbed into internet visuals: gothic, maximalist, slightly unhinged. But what keeps drawing people back is Alice herself, a young woman who looks at everything that's been arranged for her convenience and decides she'd rather face a monster. So here's the reframe. Burton's Alice in Wonderland was never really about Carol or nostalgia or whether the CGI holds up. It was about what happens when a woman decides that the life everyone else planned for her simply isn't the one she wants. After all this time, with the conversation around female agency in film still very much alive, that premise lands as clearly as it ever did. This is Ladies First, watching women in movies. Here, we empower women by reviewing and discussing films that highlight their stories, struggles, and achievements. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.